short, we will know if in the World Happiness Report in 2020, for example, the average happiness is a significant step forward from what it is today. That will mean that we will have been successful. Now, how do we get there? And this is, I think, an important point. And it just gets to the mechanics and the mathematics of just averaging out numbers, which is, if you look at the current distribution of happiness, most societies, I think the average is about 5.5 or 6 or so. And in most developed societies, it's around 6, 7. Now, it is, what you find is most people do report being relatively happy. And in developed nations, actually, the majority of people report around 7 or 8 or 9 or even 10 out of 10. But you always find this tail in the distribution of a minority of people, say 20% of society, who report being very unhappy. People actually score and report being 0 out of 10, 1 out of 10, 2 out of 10.
Wow.
These are people that we've identified as either living in abject poverty, even in developed nations, or having real mental health concerns and issues. So a very basic way to try and reach our KPI of having a higher average well-being across the globe, I would argue to really focus on the people at the very bottom of the distribution. Because if we can raise 15% of the population from an average of 2 out of 10 to say 5 out of 10, which is doable if we deal with these basic mental and physical concerns, we will have a dramatically powerful impact on the average well-being in society. Much more than if we were to say raise 15% of people that are currently at 8 and move them to 9, which is great, but it will have less impact on the overall well-being of society. So to answer your question in a nutshell, we need to simply look at the global well-being data and see whether or not we're making progress on that. And I think the best way to do so is to focus on the bottom end. How does social media play a role in well-being? I'm aware of a paper on the impact of television on people's well-being, and it's not good. And I'm aware of, like, there's a number of scholars working on this right now to see how much time you spend on social media and how that influences people's well-being. I haven't seen very conclusive results, but it seems to be indicating that because well-being and happiness is such a relative phenomenon, we do compare and contrast ourselves to the reference points around us, such as our brothers or sisters or our peer group at work or at school. And the mere fact, as we all know, that what gets posted on Facebook, for example, tends to be the best of ourselves and not necessarily the worst of ourselves. So it gives a sense, it represents people in ways, or it in an artificial way, drives up the reference points to which we match ourselves.
Right.
And so, such and such are off on an amazing trip to the Bahamas, and I'm just stuck at home. But the fact of the matter is that 99% of people are stuck at home, but you're only seeing the 1% who's having a fun time in the Bahamas. And so that is an issue. So I would expect that when these analyses are properly run, it's likely going to come out that the relative aspect of people's happiness and well-being comes in, which we know is important. That dynamic will not play out well. So it's very likely that social media over the whole will actually negatively impact people's well-being. But that needs to be then put against the fact that social media may also connect people to some extent. As we were saying, Renee, just before, thanks to Twitter and Facebook, it also allows people to connect and organize themselves. And so that the March for Women's Rights and Respect that took place just, a week or two ago, would not have been able to have been carried out so effectively if it wasn't for social media. So there's positives. So there's positives and negatives. It's a bit of a balanced story, as progress tends to be, I suppose. But there's a famous saying which says, what gets measured gets done. Mm-hmm. And so the mere fact that happiness is now being measured appropriately across the world and in communities, and most national statistics offices are actually starting to measure it. The OECD is pushing it. So the mere fact that we're now able to show people whether well-being is increasing or decreasing and say the World Happiness Report ranking, which started in 2012, has had such an impact. Over 1 million people are actually downloading the report each year. So it is starting to have impact. I think it's also what's driving the fact that now these policymakers who are all running around on evidence-based policy want to be able to show the impact on well-being. So what stems me hopeful is that we now have good measurements, and that is something that policymakers are able to track and push for as key performance indicators moving forward. And this is actually important because when this dates back to GDP, I think in 1934, when Simon Kuznets, Nobel laureate who invented national income accounts, the person who invented GDP essentially, When he spoke to the US Congress introducing his measures, he says, please don't take my measure of national income accounting, GDP, as the measure of social progress. But because it became a measure, and because what gets measured, it gets done, for the next sort of, 70, 80 years, it has become the main measure of our success as societies. And so I think and really lots of appreciation, kudos to the people who've made it possible across the world now to really start measuring this. So the Gallup organization since 2006, measuring well-being globally. The Eurobarometer, the Latino Barometer, doing it in smaller samples since the 70s and the 80s. The Office for National Statistics since 2012 doing it. So I think that revolution in actually measuring well-being will make that people will start paying more notice and will be able to track success and performance over time. So that